Have you ever been that child? The one who refused to follow the rules, who questioned everything, who couldn't just do what you were told even when you tried. Maybe teachers called you stubborn. Maybe your parents said you were difficult. You weren't trying to cause trouble. You just couldn't silence that voice inside that said, "This isn't fair. This doesn't feel right." I know that child too, because I was one. And for years, I thought something was wrong with me, that my defiance meant I was flawed or ungrateful. What if it wasn't defiance at all? What if that rebellion was a form of self-protection, a cry for understanding when words didn't work? Because behind every so-called rebellious child lies a truth that was never heard. Rebellion isn't disrespect. It's the soul's way of saying, "I exist, please see me." When I studied developmental psychology, I came across the work of Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, who built the self-determination theory, a framework that says all human beings share three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and connection. When a child's autonomy is constantly restricted through punishment or control, the natural response isn't obedience, it's resistance. Maybe you've seen it before. One child becomes quiet and compliant, the good one. Another becomes argumentative and bold, the difficult one. Yet both are responding to the same wound, the belief that love must be earned by behaving the right way. John Bowlby's attachment research showed that when children experience inconsistent love, accepted one moment, rejected the next, they test boundaries not to defy, but to find out where safety truly lies. Their rebellion is not chaos, it's a search for certainty. Neuroscience helps us understand this even deeper. When a child's feelings are dismissed or punished, their brain's amygdala, the part that senses threat, lights up as if they're in real danger. Their body floods with stress hormones and they go into fight or flight mode. What we interpret as rudeness or defiance is often just fear. Fear of not being heard, fear of losing control, fear of being unloved. I've seen so many adults respond to this fear by silencing it, grounding, yelling, medicating. But in doing so, we don't solve the problem. We only push the pain deeper. The restless boy who can't sit still isn't misbehaving. He's trying to feel alive. The girl who challenges authority isn't being disrespectful. She's learning how to protect her truth. Maybe you were once that child, the one who questioned too much, who was told to calm down when all you wanted was to be heard. That's what a rebel child really is. Not bad, not broken, just trying to protect their sense of self in a world that feels too controlling. Psychologists call it the struggle for autonomy, the natural need to feel seen, capable, and free. When that need is denied, rebellion becomes a language of survival. And here's the truth. Many rebel children grow into creative, passionate adults. The same fire that once scared others often becomes the light that changes the world. So before we silence rebellion, maybe we should listen to it. Because every act of defiance is just another way of saying, will you still love me when I am real? When you really think about it, rebellion doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It doesn't belong to one home, one school, or one moment. It grows wherever love and freedom lose their balance. Every environment a child grows up in teaches them something about power, safety, and belonging. And when those lessons start to clash, rebellion becomes the only language they have to make sense of it all. At home, rebellion is usually born in the space between love and control. Parents often believe they're teaching discipline, but to a child it can feel like being unseen. When affection depends on obedience, the message becomes, you're lovable only when you're good. I've seen it happen quietly. A father who demands respect but never explains why. A mother who confuses protection with control. The child absorbs it all, and when words fail, rebellion appears. It's not a rejection of love, it's a protest against conditional love. Research from the University of Rochester shows that children raised in authoritarian households, where rules outweigh warmth, are significantly more likely to develop deception, aggression, and withdrawal. But when parents combine structure with empathy, children internalize rules as safety, not control. What softens rebellion isn't more power, it's more listening. At school, rebellion takes on a different form. The classroom for many children is their first miniature version of society. It's where they learn whether thinking differently is rewarded or silenced. I remember a student who was constantly sent out of class for talking too much. But when I asked what he talked about, his teacher sighed. He keeps asking why. That question, why, is the birthplace of intelligence. Yet, in rigid environments, curiosity is often mistaken for defiance. Educational psychologist Alfie Kohn once wrote, "Children learn to make good decisions by making decisions, not by following directions. When children are given no room to question, they stop asking, but they don't stop wondering. Their rebellion moves inward, they disengage, they start believing their thoughts are dangerous." In truth, what schools often label as disruption is simply the child's mind refusing to go numb. And then there's society, the broadest and most invisible teacher. When I talk to teenagers, I often see rebellion turn from emotional to moral. They don't just resist their parents, they resist hypocrisy. They see adults preach kindness but practice judgment, talk about honesty but hide truth. Rebellion here becomes a mirror held up to the world. You tell me who to be, but you don't live that way yourself. Developmental psychologist Lawrence Steinberg explains that the adolescent brain undergoes massive changes in the prefrontal cortex, strengthening reasoning and moral judgment. So when a teenager rebels, they're not always rejecting values, they're trying to define their own. What adults call attitude is often a developing sense of ethics, clashing with the convenience of conformity. Rebellion can look very different depending on how the world responds. In a home where parents listen, rebellion turns into conversation. In a classroom where questions are welcomed, it becomes curiosity. And in a society that values honesty, it grows into leadership. When we respond with fear, rebellion hardens into anger. But when we meet it with understanding, it becomes growth, a chance for something deeper to emerge. You've probably seen this before, a child arguing not to win but to be heard. A student challenging a rule, not because they hate it, but because they want to understand. A teenager questioning old traditions, not to destroy them, but to find what's still true. Their voices might sound loud, their actions might look messy, but underneath it all, there's something deeply human, a search for honesty, for space, for belonging. Sometimes rebellion is not about breaking things, it's about trying to make them real again. That's why I've stopped asking, how do we stop rebellion? And started asking, what is it trying to tell us? Because rebellion always carries a message. It shows us where love has turned into control, where curiosity has been replaced by obedience, and where authenticity has been traded for fear. Once we start listening, rebellion stops dividing us. It becomes a bridge, reconnecting us to our children, to truth, and to the kind of freedom that no longer needs to fight to exist. When I think about rebellion in children, I no longer see it as a flaw that needs to be fixed, but as a response to an environment that has stopped listening. When a child feels unseen or powerless, rebellion becomes their way of saying, "I exist." It's easy for adults to call it defiance, but underneath the outbursts, slammed doors, or quiet resistance, there's often a deeper story, one about needing safety, voice, and belonging. In homes where rules are enforced through fear rather than respect, children quickly learn that speaking up has a cost. A raised voice, a cold silence, or even a disappointed look can teach them that honesty is dangerous. They start to edit themselves, hiding opinions, swallowing tears, rehearsing the right answer before they speak. For some, this submission becomes a permanent habit. These are the children who appear obedient but live with constant anxiety. Their compliance is not peace, it's self-protection. Others go in the opposite direction. They fight back, push limits, and refuse to be controlled. They are often labeled as difficult, yet in truth their rebellion is a desperate attempt to claim what every human being needs: agency. This split between the good and the bad child often begins early. One learns to stay safe by pleasing, the other learns to stay safe by resisting. Both are coping strategies shaped by fear. The good child is praised for obedience, but may grow up feeling invisible, always chasing approval. The bad child is punished for defiance, but often carries a stronger sense of self, even if it's wrapped in anger. When we look closely, these two children are not opposites. They are mirror images of the same wound, a longing to be accepted without conditions. Research continues to confirm what many of us intuitively know. A study published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found that children raised in highly controlling environments, those where autonomy is suppressed and mistakes are punished harshly, show higher levels of externalizing behavior, including defiance and aggression. In contrast, children raised in environments that balance structure with emotional warmth develop stronger self-control and empathy. What this means is simple but profound. Rebellion often says more about the system than the child. It's not that children want to misbehave, it's that the environment hasn't given them a safe way to express themselves. I've met many families where the pattern repeats across generations. A father who grew up in silence raises his own child the same way. A mother who is never allowed to say no demands obedience from her daughter. And the cycle continues until one child finally breaks it. That child is often labeled rebellious. But maybe they are the brave one, the one refusing to pass down what hurt them. When we look at rebellion through this lens, it stops being a threat and becomes an act of healing. Think about the child who isn't allowed to say no. That small word, denied over and over, doesn't disappear, it transforms. It turns into refusal, sarcasm, procrastination, even self-isolation. The behavior changes form, but the message stays the same: I need control over my own life. If we listen carefully, rebellion isn't chaos, it's communication. It's the moment when love and freedom collide, and the child is asking, can I still be loved if I'm honest? So maybe the question we should ask isn't, how do we stop rebellion, but what is this rebellion trying to tell us? Because rebellion, at its core, isn't about rejecting love. It's about testing whether love is strong enough to hold truth. When a child rebels, they're not turning away from connection, they're fighting to find it. And when we respond not with control, but with curiosity, we give them something far more powerful than obedience: the safety to be real. In the end, rebellion is not the storm that ruins a home. It's the wind that shows us where the walls have cracked. And if we can listen with compassion instead of fear, we might discover that the rebel child isn't trying to destroy anything at all. They're just trying to build a world where honesty and love can finally live in the same room. There was a time I thought rebellion was just defiance, a kid pushing back against rules. But the more I've lived and studied psychology, the clearer it's become. Rebellion is a mirror. It reflects the child's emotions and the emotional climate around them. Looking back at my own shouting matches, slammed doors, and quiet resistance, I can see my rebellion wasn't born in a vacuum. It was shaped by what I saw, what I absorbed, and what no one else dared to say out loud. Family systems pioneer Murray Bowen said a child's behavior is often a symptom of the system, not the individual. When one person starts acting out, they're voicing tensions everyone feels but no one names. I didn't know that as a kid. I just felt the static in the air, unspoken expectations, fear of conflict, the way love sometimes felt like control. So I did what many children do when emotions are denied. I carried them for everyone. I turned them into rebellion. Maybe you did too. Research echoes this. A 2009 Journal of Family Psychology study found that children raised in emotionally rigid families where disagreement or sadness is discouraged often express distress through externalizing behaviors, defiance, withdrawal, aggression. Not bad character, coping strategies. When emotional truth is unsafe, the body speaks in rebellion. I see that pattern every day now in clients, friends, and sometimes still in myself. Rebellion is how we say, "This isn't working," when words no longer feel allowed. Carl Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." I get that now. A therapist once told me, "Your rebellion began the moment your family stopped listening." The traits that irritated adults, my refusal to conform, my endless questions, were the very qualities they'd long silenced in themselves. My anger mirrored their silence. My defiance mirrored their fear. Rebellion rarely starts with the child. It starts with systems that confuse compliance with peace. Seeing rebellion this way changed everything. I stopped asking, "Why are they so defiant?" and started asking, "What truth are they carrying for all of us?" When a child challenges authority or a teen pushes back, it's easy to label disrespect. But neuroscience tells a different story. Without emotional connection, the limbic system, especially the amygdala, goes into overdrive. The child literally can't regulate. That fight is a nervous system begging for safety. You can't discipline that out. You calm it with understanding. I once worked with a 15-year-old constantly punished for talking back. Teachers called him disrespectful. Parents said ungrateful. When I asked what he really felt, he said, "No one ever listens unless I yell." That line still echoes. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was a desperate search for resonance. When his parents learned to listen before reacting, the yelling stopped not because he was fixed, but because he was finally heard. Now, when I meet a rebellious child, I don't see defiance. I see unheard feelings. Every outburst, every no, every slammed door is a map to where love feels uncertain and where voice stopped mattering. It reminds me of Brené Brown's line, "Connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives." That's what every rebel child is fighting for. Not against love, but for the chance to feel it again. They aren't pushing people away. They're searching for someone who won't walk away when they finally show who they are. Maybe that's rebellion's true role, an emotional mirror showing the fractures we'd rather ignore. If we can look without judgment, stay curious instead of controlling, we'll discover the rebel child was never the enemy. They were the teacher, asking us in their messy, human way to feel again, to listen, to soften, and to heal what silence left behind. There came a point in my healing when I realized something even deeper. Rebellion was never just about what I was fighting against. It was about what I was fighting for. Every time I raised my voice, every time I pulled away, every time I refused to follow the script, I was fighting for the right to feel safe being myself. And maybe that's what all rebellion really is. An instinct to protect the parts of us that still believe we deserve to exist as we are. When I started seeing rebellion that way, I began to look at others differently too. The angry teenager, the distant friend, the co-worker who always challenges authority. They're not troublemakers. They're truth tellers who haven't been taught how to speak safely. Their resistance isn't a rejection of love. It's a reaction to not being understood. It's like that quote from Carl Jung. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Rebellion often starts as the refusal to accept a false version of ourselves, the one shaped by other people's comfort, silence, or fear. I've noticed that the more we suppress rebellion, the more it mutates. If a child learns they can't say no, that no one listens when they cry, they might turn that rebellion inward. It becomes anxiety, self-blame, burnout, or even perfectionism. We think they've become calm, but really they've just turned the fight against themselves. Psychologists call this internalized rebellion, when the energy that was once used to push back on others becomes self-punishment. In that sense, even adults who never yelled or argued can still carry the same wound as the rebel child, only quieter. And I think that's why so many of us reach a breaking point in adulthood. We spend years being good, doing everything right, keeping the peace, and then one day something small snaps. We find ourselves angry, restless, questioning everything. It's not immaturity, it's the soul remembering that it still has a voice. Studies in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology describe this as a form of existential rebellion, a healthy sign that the self is waking up, demanding authenticity after years of suppression. When I first read that, I cried, because it meant there was nothing wrong with me. I wasn't broken. I was finally waking up. Rebellion, when we stop judging it, becomes a bridge back to ourselves. It asks, what have you been silencing? For me, it was sadness. The sadness of never feeling fully accepted unless I was useful, polite, or strong. For others, it might be anger, grief, creativity, or joy that was once deemed too much. When we give those parts permission to exist again, the rebellion doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes self-expression, it becomes art, honesty, purpose. I've met people who have turned that energy into incredible things. Teachers who now defend students who challenge the system. Artists who use their voice to question norms. Parents who let their kids speak even when it's uncomfortable. That's what healed rebellion looks like. It's not loud or destructive anymore, but alive and honest. It creates instead of destroys. There's a deep kind of peace that comes with that. Not the quiet of obedience, but the calm that comes from knowing you no longer need to fight to exist. It reminds me of something the psychologist Abraham Maslow once said. What is necessary to change a person is to change his awareness of himself. Once you see rebellion not as a flaw, but as a signal, once you become aware of what it was protecting, everything begins to shift. You don't lose your fire, you just learn how to guide it. So if you've ever looked back on your younger self and felt shame for being too much, too angry, or too stubborn, maybe take a second look. That version of you wasn't broken, they were brave. They were the one who refused to disappear completely, even when silence seemed safer. And now, that same energy can become your compass. It can point you toward truth, boundaries, purpose, the things that can finally hold your life together without fear. Because rebellion, at its core, was never the enemy of love or peace. It was the beginning of it. It was your heart saying, I'm still here. I still matter. And once you learn to listen to that voice, not to silence it, not to fear it, that's when healing truly begins. That's when rebellion stops being a cry for help and starts becoming a call to life. There was a time when I thought rebellion was just defiance, a child pushing back against the rules. But the more I've lived and the more I've studied psychology, the clearer it's become. Rebellion is a mirror. It reflects not only the child's emotions, but also the emotional climate of the world around them. When I look back at my own past, the shouting matches, the slammed doors, the silent resistance, I can see now that my rebellion was never born in a vacuum. It was shaped by what I saw, what I absorbed, and what no one else dared to say out loud. Psychologist Murray Bowen, the founder of family systems theory, once said that a child's behavior is often a symptom of the system, not the individual. That means when one person in a family starts acting out, they're often expressing the tension that everyone feels, but no one names. I didn't know that when I was younger. I just felt the tension in the air, the unspoken expectations, the fear of conflict, the way love sometimes felt like control. So I did what many children do when emotions are denied. I carried them for everyone else. I turned them into rebellion. Maybe you did too. Studies in developmental psychology back this up. Research from the Journal of Family Psychology, 2009, found that children raised in emotionally rigid families where open disagreement or sadness were discouraged often expressed distress through externalizing behaviors, defiance, withdrawal, or aggression. These weren't signs of bad character, they were coping strategies. When emotional truth is unsafe, the body speaks in rebellion. I see that pattern every day now in clients, in friends, and sometimes still in myself. Rebellion is how we say, "This isn't working," when words no longer feel allowed. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." I understand that now more than ever. As a therapist once told me, your rebellion began the moment your family stopped listening. The things that irritated adults about me, my refusal to conform, my endless questioning, were the very qualities they had once suppressed in themselves. My anger mirrored their silence. My defiance mirrored their fear. Rebellion, I realize, doesn't start with the child. It starts with the systems that mistake compliance for peace. And when I began to see rebellion that way, everything changed. I stopped asking, why are they so defiant? And started asking, what truth are they carrying for the rest of us? When a child challenges authority, when a teenager pushes back, it's easy to label it disrespect. But neuroscience tells a different story. When emotional connection is missing, the brain's limbic system, especially the amygdala, goes into overdrive. The child literally can't regulate. The fight you see is their nervous system begging for safety. You can't discipline that out of them. You can only calm it with understanding. I once worked with a 15-year-old boy who was constantly being punished for talking back. His teachers said he was disrespectful. His parents said he was ungrateful. But when I asked him what he really felt, he said, "No one ever listens unless I yell." That sentence still echoes in me. It's not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's a desperate search for resonance. Once his parents learnt to listen before reacting, the yelling stopped. Not because he was fixed, but because he was finally heard. Now, when I meet a rebellious child, I don't see defiance anymore. I see feelings that haven't been heard. Every outburst, every no, every slammed door, it's a message about where love started to feel uncertain and where their voice stopped mattering. It reminds me of something Brené Brown once said, "Connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives." That's what every rebel child is really fighting for. Not against love, but for the chance to feel it again. They're not trying to push people away. They're trying to find someone who won't walk away when they finally show who they are. Maybe that's what rebellion truly is, an emotional mirror held up to us, showing the fractures we'd rather ignore. And if we can look into that mirror without judgment, if we can stay curious instead of controlling, we'll discover that the rebel child was never our enemy. They were our teacher. They were asking us in their own chaotic way to feel again, to listen, to soften, to heal what silence left behind. There came a point when rebellion stopped feeling like power and started feeling like exhaustion. I was tired of fighting against rules, against silence, against the weight of being misunderstood. Maybe you felt that too. That quiet fatigue of someone who spent years defending their right to exist. For those of us who grew up needing rebellion to survive, peace can feel foreign. We don't know how to rest because we've never trusted calm to stay. Healing, I learned, isn't about losing your fire. It's about learning how to let it warm you instead of burn you. For a long time, I thought freedom meant never needing anyone again. But that wasn't freedom. It was fear. True freedom is being able to choose connection without losing yourself inside it. It's being honest without having to fight for it. The turning point came when I stopped punishing my anger and started listening to it. Every outburst, every no, every wall I built was trying to say one thing: I want to be seen. Gabor Mate once said, "The attempt to suppress our true emotions is what drives us to suffer." My rebellion wasn't wrong, it was communication. Once I understood that, everything softened. My anger became a message, not a weapon. Science backs this up. Research from Harvard's Center on the Developing Child shows that emotional healing happens through connection, not control. When we experience relationships where honesty feels safe, our brains literally begin to relax. The nervous system learns that truth no longer means danger. That's how rebellion turns into freedom. But healing isn't just biological, it's human. It's when you stop seeing rebellion as a flaw and start seeing it as a form of courage. Every difficult child was simply trying to stay alive in their truth. Every angry adult is still trying to do the same. Psychologist Kristin Neff's studies on self-compassion show that when we treat ourselves with understanding instead of judgment, emotional resilience grows. We stop fighting ourselves and start protecting ourselves, gently this time. Now, when I look back, I see rebellion for what it truly was: a bridge, not a wall. It led me toward truth, boundaries, and self-respect. The fire that once burned everything down now keeps me warm. And maybe that's what healing really means: not silencing the rebel inside you, but teaching it that it no longer needs to fight to be free. Because real freedom isn't found in resistance. It's found in peace that doesn't demand your silence. There was a time when my life felt like a constant storm, every emotion sharp, every silence heavy. I kept thinking something was wrong with me, that I was too emotional, too reactive, too much. But what I didn't realize was that the chaos wasn't a sign of failure. It was the sound of my soul trying to wake me up. Maybe you've felt that too. That moment when everything inside you starts to crack open, and even though it hurts, some quiet part of you knows it's necessary. I used to think healing meant becoming calm, composed, untouchable. But now I understand that the calm we're searching for isn't the absence of chaos, it's the wisdom that grows from it. The truth is, you can't silence pain without silencing truth too. The anger, the confusion, the tears, they were never my enemies. They were messages from the parts of me I had buried for years, waiting to be heard. I wasn't breaking down, I was breaking open. I remember reading something from psychologist Carl Jung that changed how I saw everything. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. It made me realize that what feels like falling apart is often the beginning of becoming whole. The chaos wasn't punishment. It was an invitation. It asked me to stop running from my own truth and to finally meet it face to face. And when I did, slowly, the noise began to soften. I started to see patterns not just in my past, but in myself. The rebellion that once came out as shouting turned into clarity. The anger that once pushed people away became honesty. The chaos became a kind of map, leading me home to the parts of me I had abandoned. So if you're in that storm right now, feeling lost, confused, or undone, maybe this is not the end of you. Maybe it's the awakening of you. The rebel in you wasn't meant to destroy your life. It was meant to shake it awake. Because sometimes the loudest chaos is just your soul saying, it's time. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not about changing who we were, but understanding why we became that way. Every act of rebellion was once a message, every silence a form of survival. And now, we get to translate those messages into peace. So if this story found you at the right moment, stay a little longer. There's more to uncover here, about the child you were, the freedom you still deserve, and the quiet strength waiting to be heard again.